Our next speaker is a rapidly rising star in politics. He's a business and employment lawyer by training. He was elected to Parliament just 3 years ago, but he made the front bench in record time as Shadow Business Secretary. So he looks like being our minister if there's a change of government at the next election. We welcome Chuka Umunna.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak today, Simon. It's an honor to be with all of you. One of my great privileges in this job is that I get to meet so many entrepreneurs, so many people like you, who show that through striving, that burning desire to make tomorrow better than today, in spite of all the economic difficulties there are, that is the mark of those who dare to do and often succeed. And it's that spirit, that vision of the future that marks out so many of you. Let me just tell you a story. Nearly 50 years ago, a young man got on a boat in Nigeria with just a suitcase of belongings and a head full of dreams. And he arrived in Liverpool, worked his way to London. He borrowed the fare from a complete stranger, and he did any job he could to get himself started. He scrubbed, he cleaned, he worked hard. He worked every working hour. And over time, he set up an import-export business, which became a real success. But that was only after late nights, all those phone calls, those make and break meetings that I'm sure so many of you know so well. And of course, with success came the most glittering prize of all, IoD membership. And that man was my father, who passed away just over 20 years ago. But that is, and I've got it here, that is his membership card. A bit retro, Simon. But he was part of this fantastic organization. And my dad, he's my inspiration. He's why I'm here today. He's why I'm speaking to you. And all of you play a real vital role in our society and our economy, spreading prosperity, driving innovation, and creating opportunity. Now, I firmly believe that it's the role of politicians, to give as many people as possible the ability to be lifted by that spirit, to make the most of their potential, to fulfill their ambition. But I don't think this can be done alone. I was at the Camden Collective, which is a business accelerator, a space for startups, this morning. And a young entrepreneur said to me, what I've heard a few IoD members say to me, which is, look, I just want government to get out of the way. Leave us alone, let us get on and run our businesses. But of course, as is always the case, this was preceded by a 10-minute long list of all the things he needed us to do first. And of course, you know, business needs a healthy, well-educated workforce, demand from consumers, good infrastructure, and that's all about government doing its part to support you, because we're interdependent in my view. We succeed when we pull together. And pulling together has never been more important than it is now. The world is experiencing unpredictable change on a scale we haven't seen before. Just think of the forces shaping our global future: climate change, population shifts, the balance of economic power moving south and east, huge advances in technology, increased competition. These are big issues and big forces that, of course, a lot of you are already dealing with. And you know as well as I do that these forces present both opportunity and challenge, both promise and peril. So in that context, and knowing we are ambitious for our future, where are we? Well, the Chancellor spoke to you this morning about the growth that we have seen return to the economy, and that is very welcome after 3 years of almost no economic growth. But we know people here, people outside in the country, that is not nearly enough. We have got to be doing much more to prepare our economy for these global forces that I'm talking about that are transforming our world. And in doing so, we must heed the lessons of history. A lesson of unbalanced growth, over-reliant for growth on sectors like finance, housing, and on areas like London and the South East. A lesson of an economy where too few of the gains from growth have reached working families, leaving them overstretched. A lesson of an economy too focused on the short term and not on the long-term vision of the future we need. Because if we don't learn these lessons of history, we're destined to repeat them. So my argument is that our challenge is to reform our economy as we return to growth. We cannot return to business as usual. But rather than addressing the problems in our economy, my fear is that the government is exacerbating them, taking the easy path, not the right path. So take just one example, the Chancellor's signature Help to Buy scheme. Now, I think that risks re-inflating the housing market unless we build more homes. And we have seen the lowest level of new homes built since the 1920s. So let's not kid ourselves. Yes, we are starting to see growth. Good. That's good. But the job of reforming our economy and preparing for the future has barely begun. So what would Labour do differently? I can hear everyone saying it in their heads. Well, look, last year we asked your former Director General, Sir George Cox, to lead a review of the change needed in the business environment to prepare us for the future. And you'll see the cover of his report there. Now, Sir George is an independent man. This wasn't a Labour thing. This was an independent review, full of sharp analysis and wise counsel. And Sir George puts the blame for the focus on short-term results on the many market pressures you face when you are trying to build for the long term. But he also points the finger at UK governments of all colours for having a short-term view driven by electoral cycles. What on earth can he mean? Short-term electoral cycles that, of course, detract from the long-term strategic focus that our economy needs. Now, Sir George says reform should have industrial strategy at its heart, which should form the cornerstone of government policy. And I agree with him. So what does that involve? Well, time is against me, so let me just focus on two crucial pieces of that jigsaw. The first is reforming finance in this country so that you can get the money you need to grow your businesses. I'm proud that here in my home city, we have a world-leading financial services sector. I'm proud of that. But we need it to do as good a job serving your needs as it does for the global economy. Let me just tell you, so a couple of weeks ago, I was in Manchester, and I visited a great family-run business called Duo UK. And they manufacture polythene packaging. They're exactly the kind of firm we need more of, ambitious, entrepreneurial, and well-run. But when they wanted finance to grow their business, they couldn't find it here. They couldn't find it here. They ended up turning to a scheme run, wait for it, by the Italian government. The Italian government. Now, that cannot be right, and we have got to change that. So we need more competition in banking, I think, to make the banking system up its game. So we are supporting very actively challenger banks, but we also need more competition to banking. So I want to see more alternative sources of business finance, like factoring and peer-to-peer lending. And I think Samir Desai from Funding Circle is going to be up shortly after me, and it's good to see him here. But government's got to step up too. We are the only G8 country without a proper state-backed investment institution to help our businesses. So we will establish, if we are elected, a proper British investment bank and a network of regional and local banks inspired by the German Sparkasse model to support our businesses. But of course, there is absolutely no point sorting out all your funding needs if we don't also ensure that we have a system that is delivering you with the people who have the right skills. And that brings me to the second part of the jigsaw. In government, we made great strides in primary, secondary, and higher education. Now we've got to do more for those choosing vocational paths, for example, with the new technical baccalaureate, the Tech Bac that we've been talking about. And when it comes to workplace skills, we want to put you, the employers, in the driving seat. So you, together, you will get control of the money, and with that will come the responsibility to ensure that people are trained. But we've also, and this is another piece of the jigsaw, we have got to foster that spirit of enterprise across the country, especially among our young people. And I'm delighted that there are so many inspiring young entrepreneurs who are here today. And it's why today, actually, with the Shadow Work and Pensions Secretary, Liam Byrne, we have published a report by the former MD of Innocent Drinks, Jamie Mitchell, and that report is about how we can put the spirit of enterprise at the centre of our national story and get more of our young people into work by them setting up businesses. So, by delivering a visionary and practical industrial strategy in partnership with a vigorous private sector, we can reform this economy so it delivers more long-term sustainable growth. And if we're elected, and we make no presumptions, that is going to be our focus. But we're not waiting until we are in government to make a real difference. To finish, let me just tell you about a campaign that we are running, and I'm pleased to, today the IoD have come out very much in support of this. At the start of this year, I called for the UK's first ever Small Business Saturday, and helped to bring together a coalition of businesses, councils, and other organisations to make that happen. And it's an idea that is really capturing the nation's imagination. It already exists in the US. And look, the idea is simple. On Saturday, the 7th of December, we are asking people to make a special effort to celebrate the contribution our small businesses make to this country. And on that day, the Small Business Saturday campaign is urging people to buy local, place an order with a small firm, do your bit to celebrate what they bring to your community. And if you're a small firm, please do sign up so you can get involved. Let's make that day a success. I truly do believe we are strongest when we pull together, when we work together, when we succeed together. So thank you so much for asking me to speak today. Thank you. Thank you.
Chuka, thank you very much indeed. A couple of brief questions. I wonder what sort of guides you philosophically. Your leader describes himself as a socialist. Is that something you'd be comfortable describing yourself as?
I'm quite happy being described as a democratic socialist or a social democrat, but I think what matters is this. I'm driven by a belief that ultimately, I talked about us doing things together, that we're mutually dependent. And say, look at business. Business and society are mutually dependent. Business depends on society to provide the people, the custom, the infrastructure, and we, of course, rely on business to provide the growth and jobs. And what I'm concerned about is I want to empower people to go on and do for themselves. I want to see more people doing, frankly, what my father did, which is starting from nothing and going on to be something. And I don't think people want us to do things to them. I think they want us to provide them with a framework to go on and do big things. So the young entrepreneurs that I met, for example, at the Camden Community Collective this morning, they don't want us to go and tell them how to run their businesses, but what they do want is, can you give me some space? Can you help provide me with somewhere where I can start up my business? How can you help give me the finance that I need to start up? And so what we're in the business of doing is empowering people to do things for themselves, and that is really what drives me. But I think ultimately you do need support, you do need society to help you do that, and that goes back to what I was saying about us all depending on each other. Sorry, that was such a long way, as a typical politician of answering your question.
Wouldn't exempting small businesses, start-up businesses, businesses below a certain size from various forms of regulation, or indeed from something like national insurance employers' contributions, wouldn't that help get start-ups running and more successful?
Well, I mean, one of the parts of the plan to get the economy going again that we've been advocating during the 3 years of flatlining, I suppose, was to give micro businesses of fewer than 10 employees a national insurance break. And I'm glad that the government is following that up with its new enterprise employers allowance, and I think they deserve credit for that. I wish they'd done it sooner, but I'm not going to oppose for opposition's sake. I think that's very encouraging. One thing I would say, and that I would like to get across to everybody, and I'm not able to actually say anything about what a Labour government would do in 2015 right now, but I know on the tax side how much of an issue business rates are for everybody at the moment. So we get that. And on the regulation side, I mean, let me not ignore that one. I'm not going to do, I've been absolutely upfront about this, I'm not going to do what ministers and shadow ministers have done in the past and whisper sweet nothings in your ears about cutting red tape. I want to reduce the regulatory burden for businesses where we can, but I think it's as much about the quality of regulation as it is about the quantity. And so often I talk to business people who actually don't mind some of the regulations, like the competition regime, but actually if you've got rules and regulations, and I'm talking to local authorities here, please do write them up in a way where if you're a small business, you don't have to hire an army of risk managers, lawyers, and accountants to tell you how to comply with it.
A popular answer. Let me ask you a bit about tax too. Many of our members are startup entrepreneurs, some aren't. Would you raise the top rate of income tax? Would you introduce a so-called mention tax?
I think our principle basically is that those with the broadest shoulders should bear the heaviest burden. And our judgment at the moment is, for example, is it right when middle-income and lower-earning families are really struggling under the burden of the biggest cost of living crisis in a generation? In that context, is it right to give people who are earning a lot more and doing better, to give them a big tax cut? And that's why we oppose bringing down the top rate of tax from 50 to 45p. But what I've said is I'm not necessarily married to a particular measure, but I am married to the principle of ensuring that those with the broadest shoulders bear the heaviest burden. And I think, ultimately, we're not, I'll be honest with you, government policymakers are never always going to get this right. I think our job is to strike the right balance between fairness, but also ensuring that we don't choke off people's desire to create wealth. Because what we want to do, frankly, are much more, I think, how you cut the pie is one thing, but actually what we want to do is grow the pie. And at the end of the day, all of you in this room are about growing the pie.
And you talked about training and preparing young people for that workforce. Something like 250,000 people leave education every year without the recognized minimum grades in maths and English at GCSE. What's to be done about that? And let me say, is there philosophical opposition to free schools and what they could mean?
Well, I think on the free schools, I think my issue with the free schools, and I represent the constituency of Streatham. It is the centre of the universe, by the way. And we've got a real shortage of primary and secondary school places. So I think my critique, if you like, of the government's free school plans are that it's promoting opening up free schools in areas where they don't have those problems with places, whereas I'd rather have us focus on the areas that need the school places. And I would actually like to give many more of our schools the kind of freedoms that the academies and free schools have. But undoubtedly, and I mentioned it in the speech, I know how much of an issue skills are. And often people say to me, we've got the most technologically savvy young generation that there is. You give a 4-year-old an iPhone and they know how to use it. Give it to somebody who's a bit older, they need to open the instruction book. But despite all of this and knowing the technology, their phone manner's awful. Now, I think that's a bit unfair, actually. But undoubtedly, there aren't enough people who are coming to your businesses who have got the basic literacy and numeracy, and that's why we've said we would have people study maths and English up to the age of 18, because we recognise that's a problem.
And let me try a final question. Europe, we've talked a lot about it today. What sort of powers might you like to see repatriated from Europe to this country, particularly in the business sector?
Well, I believe in the principle of subsidiarity, and I think sometimes at a European level that has been forgotten. And what I mean by that is taking decisions at the lowest level as opposed to taking them at a European level for the sake of it. But to be honest, obviously repatriation of powers, this has been a major issue for the government and this proposed renegotiation. But what I would really like to see Europe doing is being much more focused on growth. I'd like to see us have a growth commissioner. I'd like to think about them when they are creating European legislation and regulations, questioning whether it's really necessary to create them and burdening you with more rules and regulations to comply with. But, the bottom line for me is I do think we should stay in Europe. I recently led a trade mission to China. I met senior officials and the vice president over there, and the Chinese cannot understand why would we want to come out of Europe. And one thing that really brought home Europe's importance to me, and this is probably particularly so in respect of some of the new startups here, IP is such an issue for us in terms of exploiting these new emerging markets. We've got to be able to do so safe in the knowledge that our IP isn't going to be nicked. Now, we're in a much better situation to negotiate with the Chinese on that when we're sitting there with 26 other countries around the table than we are on our own. And, I know how much of an issue IP is, particularly for people in this room in the tech space. So that is why, ultimately, I think we've got to stay engaged. We have to reform it. Of course, we must do that. But we need to stay in Europe because I think it's best for your businesses. I have to say that.
Chuka, thank you very much.
Pleasure. Thank you very much.
We'll get off together now.